Speaking of divides between Democrats and the Biden administration, let's move to this Israel block, because if you see, we can put this up on the screen, this is B1. If you take a look at how Democrats are responding to Biden's comment in this big Time magazine interview, he was asked by the interviewer, do you believe that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation? Biden said, I'm not going to comment on that. Then he goes and comments on it and says there's every reason for people to draw that conclusion. And he goes on also to say, I would cite that before the war began, the blowback he was getting from the Israeli military for wanting to change the constitution, change the court, and so it's an internal domestic debate that seems to have no consequence, and whether he would change his position or not, it's hard to say, but it has not been helpful. Sort of saying the quiet part aloud, kind of in the Time magazine interview, and then going into B2, we can put this up on the screen. Netanyahu was invited to address a joint session of Congress. There is no date for it. I think this happened actually back in March, but more congressional progressives. This cites Jayapal. Even, you have people like Steny Hoyer saying, I'm not sure this is helpful for Netanyahu. There are actual AIPAC people who are now trying to distance themselves
Hoyer
from
leads
this.
the AIPAC trip every other year to Israel.
Ryan, this is your bread and butter. Break down what's happening with the divide, the growing divide here between Biden, who's trying to kind of have it both ways with Netanyahu, and his coalition here at home.
Right, so Biden, by saying it has not been helpful when he's talking about Netanyahu's sense of self-preservation, is referring to a piece that doesn't get discussed enough, I think, in American media that factors into the war, which is that Netanyahu is facing corruption charges. And if he leaves power, it's not just that he goes to become a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy Center. He could actually go to prison for these corruption charges. He is extraordinarily unpopular for his moving a whole bunch of troops up to the West Bank to defend these kind of rampaging settlers before October 7th, and by sapping the country's energy for like 6 months leading up to October 7th by trying this takeover of the courts, which was not unrelated to the corruption charges. So that people are already furious at him about that, and believe that those two things factored into Israel kind of being weakened at the moment of October 7th, which allowed this attack to go from an attack on a couple sentry positions outside of Gaza and grab some military hostages to an absolute horrific massacre over the course of the day. And so the thing that's keeping him, out of jail and in power is the fact that he's still prime minister. And the thing that's keeping him prime minister is the war. So that's exactly what Biden is referring to. That his sense of self-preservation. So we talk about how Hamas is being asked to sign on a dotted line, and with Israel saying, by this agreement, you will all die. Like their condition is that Hamas must dissolve and go away. And Hamas is, and they're like, I'm not so sure about this. On the flip side, that's also in some ways what the public and the U.S. is asking Netanyahu to do. Like, once this war ends, like, you're in trouble. Like, I wish we could come up with some, asylum. Like, look, you know what? I would love it if Netanyahu would face justice, but I'd rather that the war end, and that the tens of thousands of people, the hundreds of thousands of people facing famine could get relief, and that we can begin reconstruction, end this. And if that means he gets a retirement without prison or with some corruption charges, then fine.
Moves to Panama.
Florida, come on.
Sure.
We'll give him asylum here in the United States. And so that's what Biden's referring to there. Meanwhile, there's an invitation extended to him to come here and address a joint session of Congress. And when he came in 2015, it was this massive thumb in the nose of Obama, who very much did not want him to come. Boehner invited him anyway, and he came to demand that the Iran nuclear deal, not get put together. The audacity of a foreign leader coming to our capital and telling our lawmakers not to do a deal with a different foreign country is just kind of incredible. You cannot imagine any other foreign leader who would come to the United States and tell us how to strike a treaty with some other country.
While we are sending tons of money and weapons, and at the invitation, by the way, of our leaders, of John Boehner at the time, and also it looks like one of the big reasons that this invitation was originally extended to Netanyahu was as a kind of olive branch, right, Ryan, at the time. This was back in, I think this was a March-ish. It was earlier in the spring. It was sort of seen as a negotiating chip. Like, we may be attacking you publicly here, we may be disagreeing with you publicly here, but come on over, address a joint session of Congress because we're your greatest ally. It was kind of an interesting move, and now it seems like while there's no date, this looming over Congress is really allowing for some of the big divides between progressives, Justice Democrat, adjacent people, and the Biden administration to become more pointed, more acute than I've seen over the course of the Biden administration. I actually think it's influenced the boldness in speaking out against the Biden border policy we talked about earlier, that it's just, there's a snowball kind of rolling down the hill with people getting comfortable now openly criticizing Biden in a way that reminds me of how the Freedom Caucus typically treats people like Mike Johnson. Although there's a lot of agreement even in like the Democratic establishment that maybe the whole Netanyahu joint address isn't a good thing even for Netanyahu himself.
And all of this is happening while the question is being called both to Israel and to Hamas. With Biden has elevated this offer that Israel made. Israel has now said that it's ratified something very close to it that's gone through the Qatari foreign minister to Hamas. There are multiple balls in multiple courts and politics within each of those different coalitions. Like, Hamas is a coalition, just like the Israeli government is a coalition. It's not as if any of them are a monolith. And so to help us walk through this, Shail Ben-Ephraim, who is the host of the podcast Israel Explained, is going to join us in a moment to unpack where he thinks this is heading for Netanyahu and for the potential beginning of the end of the war. All right, so joining us now is Shail Ben-Ephraim. He's the host of the podcast Israel Explained and also a history of the land of Israel. Shail, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So can you walk us through your assessment of where Netanyahu is now when it comes to this offer that has been made and has this actual offer been made? Let's actually, before you answer, let's put this element up. This is B3. This is Barak Ravid reporting that the Qatari foreign minister is basically saying that they've received an Israeli proposal for a hostage deal, quote, that reflects the principles laid out in President Biden's speech, and they delivered it to Hamas. And so unpack that for us. Like, what is Qatar saying here? What has Israel given them, and what have they sent to Hamas?
Yeah. So on May 29th, the Israeli War Cabinet voted on an offer to give to Hamas. That offer was made at a very low moment for Israel, when a video of several female soldiers that had been taken by Hamas, who worked as observers, had been revealed to the public, and there was a lot of pressure to get a deal right now. Netanyahu was somewhat hesitant to make that offer, but he did. And because he was very hesitant to make that offer, he's been backtracking ever since. Now, that offer is very similar to the one that Biden referenced in his speech. Biden made no changes from the offer that Israel made, despite some claims to the contrary. There were some things that he omitted, for sure, especially the number of prisoners, things like that. But a lot of that is confidential and under Israeli military censorship to begin with. Netanyahu also made that offer as the only holdout in the cabinet. He was the only one who wanted to vote against that offer. And then he eventually did, because he lost his closest ally in the cabinet, Ron Dermer. So it's a three-stage offer. In the first stage, there'll be an exchange of humanitarian hostages in exchange for a release of prisoners, and Israel stopping the war for 46 days. Then there'll be negotiation over a second phase. In the second phase, there's supposed to be complete cessation of the conflict permanently, a return of soldiers. And in the third phase, there's going to be a rebuilding of Gaza that will take place over 3 to 5 years. So that's the full.
So Netanyahu's initial response when Biden came out with that proposal was to say, well, this is a non-starter. This isn't really what I meant because it doesn't allow us to continue the war. Then there were leaks from his own office saying, no, actually, this was our offer. So how did we get from that place where he was reluctantly for it, then he was against it, and now he's transmitting something that is the same in principle through Qatar? And what does it mean in principle? Is it the same deal?
Yeah. So the trouble with what we're doing here as more rational people is that we're trying to find continuity in Netanyahu's policy on a foreign policy level in terms of the national interest, in terms of getting a deal. That's a mistake because Netanyahu is only working on the level of trying to maintain his coalition. And right now, his coalition is ailing on both sides. He's got Ben Gvir and Smotrich on the right, and they're saying that they're going to bolt if there is an advance on this deal. Then you have Gantz on the left saying that he's going to bolt if there isn't advance on a deal or any kind of strategic vision towards the war. And you have immense international pressure from Biden, the likes of which, if you ignore, there will be repercussions. So what Netanyahu is trying to do is he's trying to avoid all these pitfalls by maneuvering left when he goes too far right and maneuvering right when he goes too far left to try to maintain his coalition, to try to beat the worst ramifications of having an open spat with Biden, and to try to keep Gantz in the coalition for as long as possible. So as far as the actual offer is concerned, nothing has changed because that offer is one that Israel's made. So the offer is locked in. The U.S. has already revealed it. And the reason they revealed it was because they knew that Netanyahu might back away from it and to put pressure on Hamas to agree to it too, because Hamas was probably going to say no without all this. So the offer is the same offer, but the spin is going to constantly change according to Netanyahu's political needs. And a lot of the things that he's saying are in there are not. The most obvious one is he's saying that the offer includes the Israeli right to destroy Hamas. But you're never going to give an offer to someone with saying, I'm going to destroy you. That is nonsensical. But he's saying that for political reasons. And if we understand that, then we understand what he's doing. But the offer is the same offer.
And so let's talk about actually how Biden is navigating some of those challenges here. Matthew Miller was asked about this by Niall Stange. I forget how to pronounce his last name. Sorry, Niall, but let's play this next clip and get you to react to it, Shael.
You mentioned the president's remarks, which included the idea that as long as Hamas lives up to its commitment, there could be, and I quote, the cessation of hostilities permanently. And you say that is an Israeli proposal. So the government of the state of Israel is signed up to a proposal that there could be a permanent end to hostilities and Hamas still in existence in a meaningful way.
No, they are signed up to an agreement that leads to a permanent cessation of hostilities, but with a number of provisions that have to be negotiated to get there at the end of the phase.
But if the provisions...
But I say, I'm not going to negotiate all those provisions in public. I talked about this a good deal yesterday, about the fact that one of the principles the secretary outlined in Tokyo in November is that there cannot be continued rule of Hamas in Gaza after October 7th. I'm sorry, after the end of this conflict, and that's what we're committed to.
No, but I understand that. But if the provisions required would be the dissolution of Hamas, why would Hamas sign up to get that ball rolling?
Because they don't want to see continued conflict, continued Palestinian people dying. They don't want to see war in Gaza. They want to see reconstruction of Gaza. Now, look, I will grant you one thing. I said this to Matt yesterday. It may be that Sinwar decides that he is safe in a tunnel and his interests have diverged from the people of Gaza. And so he's not willing to agree to a ceasefire, and he's not willing to look at this proposal and say it requires good faith negotiations to get from phase 1 to phase 2. So I'm not going to accept it because I'm safe and I don't have any interest in the Palestinian people who continue to suffer the ravages of war. But I will say, if you look at the deal that's on the table, it is manifestly in the interest of the Palestinian people, is manifestly in the interest of the Israeli people, is manifestly in the interest of the world. And so that's why we'll continue to push for it. And if Hamas really does represent the interests of the Palestinian people, as they say over and over, it's without a doubt that they'll take this deal.
So Niall pushing Matthew Miller on some of the same questions that you guys were just talking about, Ryan and Shael. Shael, give us a little bit of reaction to that exchange. Not an easy question to answer for the Biden administration.
Yeah, so, I hate to call people out like this, but everything he's saying is completely erroneous, and he knows it, and it's not even a question. What Miller is saying is that Hamas would accept an offer calling to remove them from power because, and I'm paraphrasing here, he cares about the Palestinian people. Sinwar cares about the Palestinian people. Sinwar does not care about the Palestinian people. Sinwar uses the Palestinian people as a tool in order to hurt Israel and increase the power of his organization. That's what he does. There's no other way to understand this war. If he cared about the Palestinian people, then he would have reached a ceasefire long ago. The Palestinian people are suffering terribly. And neither leader here particularly cares about their people, and they certainly don't care about the people on the other side. And what that clip reveals is how ridiculous it is to pretend that this deal that Israel has offered is going to allow for the destruction of Hamas. Hamas are not idiots. They have said they're not accepting this deal unless Israel states clearly that it will end the war, which they have said in that offer, and there's no question that Israel did say that in that offer, and that the United States will guarantee an end to the war. And if they don't get that, they're not going to sign an agreement. There's no reason for them to stop their control of Gaza because Israel has failed to remove Hamas militarily. The only way you can remove an enemy organization like that is by defeating them in the battlefield. Israel, for various reasons, has not done that. Hamas knows they haven't done that. And more than that, Sinwar is very hesitant to take this deal to begin with. The only reason he's thinking about doing it is because of pressure from Qatar and from Egypt. He knows that the longer this war goes on, the more of a price he exacts from Israel on the international stage. Between the ICC and the ICJ and the Biden administration and the EU and the UK not sending arms and so on and so forth. And that's just the beginning. In 2 months, things will be worse. And Sinwar showed on October 7th that his goal is not to help the Palestinian people. His goal is to hurt Israel as much as possible, as it says in the Hamas charter, and also increase their political power. October 7th has done that. They're more popular now than ever. And with the amount of pain he's inflicting on Israel, we're talking about damage that no other actor has ever done to Israel in its entire history. And he knows that.
And to unpack this Matt Miller's kind of contradiction that he has here, it reminds me a little bit of the U.S. and the Taliban. And you said, the only way to defeat an enemy like that is militarily. And even in the case of the Taliban, the United States did actually completely defeat the Taliban. And yet, because of the nature of counterterrorism and the way that it produces more enemies, the Taliban eventually came back. And we spent about a decade here in the United States trying to figure out a day after for Afghanistan, but trying to do so in a way that did not account for the Taliban. And finally, eventually, reality just intervened. And we're like, you know what, actually, it's going to be the Taliban, and we're just going to be okay with that. And it's been a couple years, and the world and the U.S. just kind of moved on. And it feels very similar, that neither Israel or the United States want to acknowledge the potential that Hamas, even if it's some renamed organization, might still be there after the war is over. And so therefore their ability to think of a day after is as irrational and kind of incoherent as the US's was in Afghanistan. Does that what's going on with Hamas and the day after here?
Yeah, so I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I think what we're seeing here is that the Biden administration actually had a pretty good plan for what to do in Gaza. Biden administration said to Netanyahu early on in the war, listen, when you finish taking over Gaza, we're going to bring in the PA. We're going to reform the PA. We're going to do that with the help of the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the EU, et cetera, a whole plan for that. Netanyahu did not accept that because that would require talking about a Palestinian state. That would require giving up on Netanyahu's policy of divide and conquer of the Palestinians, where you have Hamas in Gaza and you have the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. That way you're never going to have a Palestinian state because they're divided forever. And that way he can avoid losing Ben Gvir and Smotrich from his coalition. So Biden had a plan, a pretty good one. I don't know if it would have worked, but at least it had some realistic prospect. And Netanyahu rejected it. Not only did he reject the diplomatic element, this is the part that people miss, he rejected the military element. Netanyahu did not and has not taken over all of Gaza. And he's avoided doing that by withdrawing from cities that he's already taken and then taking the next city. Think about the fact that he's going into Rafah now, but left Khan Yunis. If he had Khan Yunis and Rafah and Gaza City, he'd basically have the Strip. He doesn't want that because once he has that, he owns the Gaza Strip. And then he has to decide what to do with it. If he just takes a city here, takes a city there, he's causing destruction, he's continuing the war, but there's no day after plan. And so right now, the Americans are, and I think this is a mistake, playing along with this fantasy that you can have a day after plan without A, taking over the entire Gaza Strip, and B, bringing in an alternate reformed government. And you mentioned, compare this to Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan was a disaster, but Afghanistan was so much more logical than this. Because in Afghanistan, the United States took over the entire country and put in an alternate government. They cleared the enemy and they rebuilt. The Israelis are unwilling to do either. They're unwilling to get rid of Hamas and they're unwilling to rebuild a new government. And the reason for that is because the Netanyahu government does not want a movement towards a two-state solution and to lose support from the extreme right. So there's no policy at all. It's much worse than Afghanistan. Afghanistan was an honest attempt to do something that went wrong. Here, there's no honest attempt to do anything.
I've got one more question, unless you have another.
No, go for it.
So here in Washington, D.C. yesterday, the House of Representatives, we could put up B5 here. The House of Representatives passed a bill basically sanctioning the International Criminal Court. 205 Republicans joined by 42 Democrats. Here's my colleague at The Intercept, Prem Tucker, listing who the 42 Democrats are. Sanctioning the ICC for threatening to issue arrest warrants. How does both the ICC's move originally, but also then the U.S. pushback against the ICC, how does that play into Netanyahu's calculations?
I don't think it plays into his calculations all that much. I don't think the ICC at this point is going to be bullied into dropping the charges against Netanyahu and Gallant. I've been talking to some people in the ICC. I've been talking to some people in the Israeli Justice Ministry. They feel, and Netanyahu knows this because he's getting advice from these people, they feel that the more the ICC is bullied, the more likely they are to go forward with it. What this is on the level of the ICC and diplomatically speaking is an attempt to shore up again the base, and also it helps divide and conquer Biden from the Republicans in the House and some Democrats as well, because Biden doesn't want to be sanctioning the ICC, nor should he, honestly. The United States is part of the liberal world order. The ICC is an organization set up to prevent future genocides. Going after them in some kind of war because you disagree with their stance on the war in Gaza goes against everything that a liberal internationalist like Biden and that entire administration should be doing. And that's why he really doesn't want to be doing it. But the reason it's being done for Republicans and for Netanyahu is completely political. It's to the Republicans to show that they're more pro-Israel than Biden is, and for Netanyahu to show that he's standing up to Biden. The place where Netanyahu feels the most comfortable in the world is in Washington, D.C., speaking before Congress, sticking a finger in the eye of a Democratic president. That's his sweet spot. And that's always gotten him a raise in the polls, and he feels very comfortable there. Running wars, not so much. Fixing problems, not so much. Giving nice speeches in Congress is great. And like everything else that Netanyahu does, this is not going to fix the problem with the ICC. The ICC is a legal organization, and what they ask is that Israel investigate what it's doing in Gaza. And that's the only way that you could get the ICC to do anything, is by having valid internal investigations in Israel. And Netanyahu refuses to do that because that wouldn't play well with the base. So instead, he's going to do a grandstanding show.
Oh, I do have,
none of this
actually, I did have one last question for you before you go. Yesterday, there were some reports that Hamas had already rejected this offer. Yet we also have reports that Hamas is engaged in these detailed negotiations, which those two things seem to be in contradiction. What's your understanding of who the final negotiators are, and what should people be watching for signals of whether or not this is going to lead to a deal?
Yeah, so the first thing I would caution is that if you hear that someone accepted or didn't accept without a statement, ignore it. There's a lot of spin right now from interested actors, and people are trying to raise the price, lower the price. And that's fine that they're doing that. That's how you negotiate. Like, Israel's doing that, U.S. is doing that, Hamas is doing that. That's how you negotiate. That's just how it's done. But as far as the actual process and not the statements, there's meetings in Doha under Bill Burns. Israeli delegation is going to be there. Qatari delegation is going to be there. Egyptian delegation is going to be there. And that's where they're going to have the talks. What's going to happen there is two things. Hamas is going to try to squeeze out some more concessions. They never accept an offer as is. They're just not wired that way, even though this offer is very good for them. So they'll be doing that. But the most important thing that both sides will be doing there is they'll be trying to do what James Baker called leave the dead cat on the other side's doorstep. You want this both sides have an interest in making this fail, but neither side has an interest in making this fail and appear to be their fault.
Right.
Because they'll be facing, Hamas will be facing a lot of problems with Qatar, and Israel will be facing a lot of problems with the United States. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to maneuver to blame the other side for the failure. The only way that this is even accepted is if both sides are somehow put it on the spot where they could be blamed for the failure, something that James Baker, who I mentioned, was very good at because he was aware of that dynamic. I'm not sure that Bill Burns really knows how to do that properly. The CIA is actually they don't specialize in negotiating. So that's what we should be looking at, because I think both sides want this to fail. Not most Israelis, by the way, and not even most of the government, but Netanyahu wants it to fail for his political reasons. And Sinwar wants it to fail for his mostly strategic reasons. And by the way, most of Hamas abroad wants it to succeed. So they're both under tons of pressure to accept it, but they don't want to. So what we're going to be seeing is people trying to avoid that.
And also we know from the reaction of the last, what looked to be ceasefire from Gazans, just celebrations in the street. Palestinian people want this to end too. So hopefully the Israeli people and the Palestinian people will get what they want, and these leaders won't. We'll see. But like you said, slim chance, since they all want it to fail.
No, it's early, Shael. So thank you so much for waking up and briefing us with your insights here. Yeah. Appreciate it so much. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.